Dr. Gerald Monk, mediator and narrative mediation author, part of the series Manuso Musing, with seasoned mediator trainer Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manuso. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Orłowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manuso, based in Houston, Texas, and in Newport, Rhode Island.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here with a special guest, Dr. Gerald Monk, who's going to be introduced warmly by his dear friend, Barbara Manuso. But first, wanted to remind everybody, so this is part of a new series we're doing with Dr. Sunderland Manuso on Manuso Musing with seasoned mediator trainer Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manuso. And so we're going to be exploring a lot of things from a lot of great guests through Dr. Manuso. And I like to say that she is a former mediation trainer of mine from years ago. And so it's great to have her on as she helps us, work with some great minds from around the world dealing with conflict resolution. So, Dr. Manuso, why don't you take it away with bringing on Dr. Gerald Monk?
Well, it's my pleasure to have Dr. Gerald Monk as the first guest on our Manuso Musing. And Dr. Monk is a he's a family therapist, and he is a theorist who has written and developed the practice of narrative mediation. It's a wonderful skill for mediators, especially those who are in the family realm and who have an opportunity to work with anything relational. So I'm very, very excited today to have Dr. Gerald Monk join us.
And Dr. Monk, before we bring you on to share a little bit about yourself, wanted to read a little bit about your bio. And this is from the San Diego State University, where you work. So it says Dr. Monk he completed his PhD at the University of Waikato, New Zealand in 1998. And he is a practicing licensed marriage and family therapist, AAMFT supervisor, and a licensed professional clinical counselor. He's a practicing licensed marriage and family therapist, AAMFT supervisor, and a clinical counselor. Now, I noticed that was repeated twice on your website, so you might want to have the tech folks over at the university fix that. But just wanted to introduce him that way because he's a credentialed and qualified expert to talk about this today. And that's very important whenever we start talking about family therapy. Okay, so Dr. Monk, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe something that people would not know about you as well.
Well, you've given me a good entry point. I am from New Zealand, Aotearoa, and really developed most of my practice in family mediation in New Zealand in the family court setting, and this is where we developed our narrative mediation work. And I think Mac wanted to have me tell a short story about something interesting. I worked for 15 years in the family court area, and then I made a decision I was going to move to the United States. So on December the 31st, 1999, I'm ready to move to the United States, and I leave from my small town of Gisborne on the east coast of New Zealand. And my town is the first city to see the light of the new day. So I was departing on the very day that the new century began. So my life started in the United States January 1st, 2000. So that's an interesting little quirky piece about me.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. And Natalia, did you want to take it over a little bit before we go
Oh,
back to
yes,
Dr. Brum's?
absolutely. So, not only that date was so significant to many, I remember how many IT specialists were actually frightened what might happen if we change those 99, actually 1999 to 2000, but also the sort of revolutionary and new approach bringing is the method you've been working on. Can you please tell us something about the narrative mediation? When I was reading about it, that was absolutely fascinating because not only does it help within the family law fields, but it also helps a person to redefine themselves. How does this miracle happen?
Well, I guess there's a lot to say on this topic, and we have a short time, so I'm trying to figure out what pieces to say first. The body of the work really built off of narrative therapy that was developed in Australia, New Zealand by Michael White, David Epstein, and it was practiced with really extreme mental health issues that folks were struggling with and getting stuck around a variety of different problematic issues in their lives. So the practice really built on dealing with real life, really challenging human relational issues. And then what we did with my colleague and dear friend, Dr. John Winslade, we developed narrative mediation from the narrative therapy frame. And, of course, we're all familiar with narrative, the story. And of course, we all understand these ideas in different ways. But essentially, the heart of it is that problems are often produced within a wider cultural societal frame. And so narrative mediation is very interested in the wider cultural, social, political elements that are taking place and how they then start being acted out and affected in this sort of personal, familial, individual way. So narrative mediation is very interested in managing these wider cultural forces. So if you're thinking about family mediation, there are lots of cultural ideas that affect many, many women and many men about how relationships should be done, how one should be in a marriage, how one should be as a parent, and oftentimes we develop these very elaborate cultural stories about how we should perform in our lives and how our partners should perform. And when we don't perform these stories in the way that others think we should, that is the time where we enter into developing very highly powerful problem saturated stories about other people. We are often characterized ourselves as a benign, kind presence in our own story, and we characterize those that we now enter into conflict in a sort of villainized manner in a problem saturated description. So that's a little piece of a sort of beginning point to think about orienting into the work.
Dr. Monk, one of your books, When Stories Clash, feeds right into what you're just describing. And you have in your book different scenarios that you had dealt with in mediation and how you use this narrative tool, because it is a tool, and it's a very powerful tool for a family mediator to be able to implement well, to help their parties find the common ground they need, since there might be divergent views and different perspectives, which is at the heart of the conflict and of the family conflict that could have built for years. Could you speak to a scenario and perhaps give something kind of concrete on how your narrative process is an effective tool? How does it address some of these items that you just mentioned?
Well, again, that's a big question. Um, to provide a little context to answer that, I was really fortunate when I arrived in the United States. It was kind of the beginning of the collaborative law, collaborative divorce movement. And I found a really strong connection with the collaborative mediators. And I was a member of the San Diego Family Law Group, and found that the sort of ethos of collaborative law and the collaborative divorce really aligned so well with narrative mediation. So some of you may know of Linda Solomon's work from many years ago, focused on the one coach model, where the mental health professional, who's also got a strong mediation background, facilitates the process with the separated couple, and you have the attorneys, the collaborative law attorneys present, and work as a team to help facilitate a process of working through the specific, discrete problems that people arrive with. One of the things that's kind of really a foundational piece of narrative mediation, and it's a bit unusual for some of the mediation contexts that a lot of us work in, is we spend time with each of the parties first to build rapport with the clients, attorneys, to understand what the nature of the problem-saturated descriptions that people are being shaped by, to understand the power of that, to kind of empathize with the understanding of the party, and we'll meet with both parties so that we're really forging a good relational bond with the two primary stakeholders. And because people are very ready to talk about problems, so narrative mediation, as much as you've said earlier, Dr. Manuso, the mediation process is highly relational. So it's not, we don't start with a problem-solving mindset where we're going, okay, let's brainstorm solutions. Because if you don't have a relational fabric built as a professional with the parties, you're going to find you're going to get stuck very, very quickly. So we're looking for understanding the power of the problem-saturated story, how it's diminishing and closing off options, the impact it's having on the party who's experiencing the problems, because often people who are in the middle of a mediation, they're so focused on the other person and what's wrong with them and what they're doing, but they're not aware of the harm that's being done to themselves and the cost of not addressing the problem. So in a way, we kind of look at the problem-saturated story in the way that this idea of the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement, the Wagner kind of idea, we kind of really join that part first. And then we've got a whole series of practices, techniques, and processes to then start to elicit elements of an alternative story that we can build on. There are small little fragments of moments of cooperation or moments of some willingness to understand something other than exclusively the problem. And we slowly, step by step, build on these pieces. For example, starting with people's motive about why are they willing to engage in, say, a collaborative divorce process, or using collaborative lawyers. How come you chose having a collaborative lawyer rather than using the conventional way of dealing with your problems in a separation? So we're listening to the problem-saturated story, and all our energies are paying attention to moments and opportunities to start to build an alternative vision about what's possible in coming together to solve problems.
Thank you. Just wanted to follow up. Can you give some kind of, I guess, more concrete example or scenario of what you typically see? Just because I think viewers and listeners in the audience, you're going to have a mix of professionals, but you're also going to have folks out there who might not know too much about the theory of narrative mediation, who are interested in maybe how we can help them. Can you give us some scenarios?
Well, often you've got looking at conflicts that involve children, and these are the most difficult ones. So you might have, let's say you've got a family whose the parents are separating. They're really stuck on developing a caregiving plan for the children. What we'll do is listen to the parties, but if we've got children who are able to articulate their ideas, their concerns, we will spend time with interviewing children, adolescents, to get their understandings and their voice in the process of understanding some kind of caregiving arrangements, for example. We will not meet with them with the parents. We'll meet with them separately and pay really close attention to having the children articulate their ideas, their dreams, their vision of what they would like within the context of the complications and the challenges. So that's something that's a little different than some practices, where we're really centering the children and hearing their voices, because often the children's voice and us helping them articulate that and in a safe way, where the children get to have the final say about what we articulate on their behalf, and that we really pay close attention to that. That often kind of shakes up the possibility of looking at a caregiving plan, if you will, about when are the children going to go with one parent or the other, and what are the change arrangements where that occurs. So I'm talking about one small piece of a process with a couple separating, and they're really stuck on developing a caregiving plan. So that would be one entry point alongside a whole lot of other things we might do.
And when I was also going into this method, and what I found fascinating about it is that one of these approaches, if I correctly understood it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was accentuating how subjective the conflict is. We always take a subjective approach to a conflict, and therefore we start with a narrative that is only me-centered in this conflict. But then what is also interesting, the point of how much the language we use frames the conflict, because we name people in this conflict within a special or certain conflict. We sometimes use words to describe them that might be offensive, or that might attribute to them certain characteristics that these people will never agree that actually would characterize them. And therefore, I found it so fascinating, for example, for intercultural marriages. I do believe that within this method, whether in therapy or in mediation, you can discover the levels of misunderstandings that grew through the years and people were not really aware of. However, they kept hurting each other. How can you unfold all those years of misunderstandings, arguments, and reframe them into something positive to make them understand and move on?
Coming from New Zealand and the work in the family court in New Zealand, we would receive resources from the government to be able to provide a series of sessions. We would have 6 sessions, which would involve meeting with the individual parties, and 3 or 4 sessions with the parties together, so that we're not attempting to help the couple with their transition into a divorce and having a matrimonial property agreement, having a family plan for caregiving. to try and do that in one session or even two, we find is highly problematic. And so we would want to have right up front, have the parties commit to a process of at least 4 sessions that would involve the individual sessions included. And so we can do some important work in laying the groundwork to set the framework to, as you say, to manage the language. We've got a series of techniques, one including externalizing, where we're constantly disrupting the pathologizing and attacking and deficit-based expressions that come from each of the parties towards one another. So we're constantly disrupting problem-saturated moves from the parties and really guiding strongly moves towards productive engagement. And so you've talked about some magical things happening. We can do some really profound work within 4 sessions in moving the parties forward. So, I mean, the practice involves a lot of ideas, a lot of particular techniques built on, you know, from my perspective, a pretty robust theoretical framework in situating the work in a sort of, as I say, in a cultural, societal kind of frame. And so cultural marriages, for example, that's very interesting for us because it would make sense why you often get a lot of additional conflictual dynamics because people are coming out of different cultural frameworks. And I'm using the word culture not only in terms of ethnic background, but we're also looking at all of the elements and identities that come into play around cultural action.
Dr. Monk, you've just expressed some ideas that I think are exciting, and they have a lot of traction for people as tools to be able to think a little differently outside the box from the regular mediation format, that the parties have an opportunity to kind of stay where they've been, where they are, and where they're going forward. And you're taking them there in a different way, but with a background of being a therapist. Not all mediators, of course, are going to have the credentials that you have, but your narrative process still has a lot of relevance. And so to translate some of your concepts that come from a person who is not a therapist, what would your recommendation be, and how can those tools translate to just the attorney, just to the human resource person, just to the mediator who has my background is public health and semiotics. So how do you translate that for me to use your skills without doing a dual practice or wading into an area that is not appropriate for my skill set? And I know you have it, but I'd like everybody to hear it, please.
Well, in North America, there is, you know, the collaborative law movement now that's been going for, I would say, probably 3 decades, and the collaborative divorce. And then in other parts of the world, there's a real interest in mediators having a lot of relational skills. And I think the mediator does need to be able to tolerate ambiguity, be able to tolerate conflictual dynamics that can show up when parties are together. And so it's interesting, you know, for those who've had a background in collaborative law and collaborative divorce, who are not therapists at all the training is all through a law context. And but what I've found is those interested in collaborative processes are often the folks who are very interested in looking after how to talk to people, how to de-escalate. um, and how to deal with the complexities of individuals having different ideas about what should be done and being in the room together with that rather than controlling everything in a separate space, because you've got, you know, a lot of mediations, the parties might greet one another at the beginning and then they don't have anything to do with one another face to face in the room. It's always shuttle mediation. So I think individuals need to want to be able to tolerate and de-escalate and realize that the relational skills are so primary in being able to progress and move parties forward. And so those are the people that are going to do better with narrative mediation. And then it's about teaching some of the tools built on a strong set of relational skills from wherever they've been developed, whether it's in law school and doing family law and just learning over the years, you know, you don't say this, you say that, you go about it this way rather than that. And so I find many attorneys that are working in the family law area have developed such a robust body of relational skills already. And so the narrative concepts can be taken on board relatively easily and relatively quickly because they kind of fit within that relational skill set.
Um, Dr. Monk, are you similar to Dr. Minister, where you were a trainer as well?
Yes, yes. I over the years I've done quite a lot of training with family lawyers, and part of I think our conversation today is more thinking about the family mediation area, but narrative mediation is involved in a whole variety of contexts. For example, I've spent quite a lot of time in Myanmar, Burma, with some of the ethnic communities in northern Burma and talking about uh, um, conflict resolution processes and the democratic process. So looking at more macro level problems, most of my work actually in the United States has been in healthcare, training healthcare ombuds to work with healthcare professionals, physicians, where there's been medical error and there's been adverse medical outcomes, and bringing the healthcare professionals together with the family, patient, people who have been harmed in a medical setting, and using narrative mediation to help facilitate a process of addressing the medical issues and the kind of supports that the family needs. So the practice of narrative mediation has been used in a whole range of areas. And so, yeah, my background has been a lot of training in different contexts, including the family mediation area.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
really pleased to say that Dr. Monk is going to be part of our training team for our family training. So we're delighted to have him. And then Norma Trush is also with the collaborative law. She's been on our team for 25 years and had been the president of the International Collaborative Association. So I'm just thrilled with the collaboration.
Yeah, and for anybody who does have deep interest in this and they wanted to pick up a book that actually describes it, I do see Practicing Narrative Mediation, Loosening the Grip of Conflict by John Wenslade and Gerald Monk. So that book is available on Amazon for anyone who might want to pick it up. But Dr. Monk, we definitely want to have you back to just keep discussing on this, because every door we open on this topic, we could talk about so many more things. And this podcast being only 20 to 30 minutes long, it never gives us enough time. So we certainly appreciate your time. I know it's early out there in California. We appreciate you giving this time to us on a Saturday morning. And thank you so much, Dr. Mendoza, for bringing him on.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Until next time, stay tuned to the next episode only on smediation.com, Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast. Thank you, Dr. Monk.
Thank you so much.